Welcome back, everybody. Um, Today's video is going to be a bit different. Um, for starters, this is going to be welcoming a new series. This one's going to be about the Constitution of Athens, and our main source here will be Aristotle. Aristotle was my source when I learned about this back in the fall, and I will continue using this as my main source because, by all means, it's one of the best sources out there. Um, I'm not sure. I don't think I could cover all of the Constitution of Athens in one sitting. So first of all, we'll be covering a couple keywords in this video. Pioneers of the Athenian Constitution and what they did to contribute. And overall, that would be most of the video. But without further ado, let us begin with the keywords. The first being Archon, which is just one of the nine magistrates at Athens. The second is the bull the council with, which prepares material for consideration by the ecclesia and supervises day-to-day administration. And next is the word deme, which is really just villages in which the Athenians are from. And the fourth word is the dicastrion, which is just the jury courts. And the fifth is the dicestis, which is really just the juries of the dicastrion. And the um, sixth word is the dokimasia, which is just a background check of a magistrate before he took up office. And sixth is the ecclesia. The ecclesia is just an assembly of adult male citizens. And the other word is the ephebi, which is just an Athenian male that's ages 18 to 20. They perform military services. That's pretty much about it. And then the other word is the epete, which is jurors in homicide courts. And the other word is the eutuna, which is just an investigation, a background check of a person who holds office. And the other is the hecaton motori, which is just citizens under bondage. That's all it means. And Heliaea is the Athenian ecclesia sitting as a court. And the king archon is just really one of the three senior archons. Now let's move on to the pioneers of the Athenian constitution. So pre-Draconian, there's pretty much everything before the 7th century. So the constitution of Athens before the time of Draco. Draco's an Athenian lawgiver. Um, it had consisted of office eligibility to depend on birth and wealth of that person. The tenure of office tended to be at first for life, and then it would be for 10 years. They were before uh, before Cleisthenes, the Athenians were really aristocratic um, society. And so powerful political offices were those of the king archon, the polemarch, and the archon. There's not really much about these positions. The polemarch and king archon are just one of the three senior archons, and archon is just like one of the nine magistrates at Athens. There's nine archons at Athens at all times. So the origins of these offices. The king archon was considered to be the most traditional, and the addition of the polemarch was due to the inefficiency of some of the kings in wars. Archons is really just it's really just like king really, and that's what it's talking about. Um, the archon was the last office, and its establishment is uncertain. However, this office, unlike the king archon and polemarch, does not control any of the traditional ceremonies. The archon takes control of the latter ceremonies, which led to its importance. The importance of the Demostetia. The Demostetia was installed at a later date, and as of right now, I don't have any date for it because I couldn't really find any. I looked through my source and I looked online. I couldn't really find anything. But anyways, these offices were basically more of a like an annual thing. Like every year there was someone new to it, and their main function was basically just to inscribe laws and preserve them for the decision of disputes, similar to Congress of the United States and how they save bills and just debate them at a later time. That's basically the most basic way to understand it. The nine archons residence. So this is not really important, but they each had their own like residence where they resided. And the power of the nine archons. The archons had the power to decide cases, and not like later on when they only had the power of preliminary hearings. And then the Areopagos in this time was really just a council that watched over the laws, and they had powers in the city, of course, but it was really just to punish and fine all offenders without an appeal, which is not really too great. And the selections for the archons were basically by birth and their wealth status, and these were the people that made up the members of the Areopagus. Um, this office in the time of Aristotle was the only one whose term remained unchanged, because each member runs for life. So pretty much here, there's the Ecclesia, there's the Areopagus, and then there's the Archons. Three of the main branches of this entire thing. And now we will move on to the era Draco's era and his contributions. This is the 7th century here. So, in the time of Draco, political power was in the hands of those who were rich enough to provide themselves their own armor. So, the rich were pretty much made up the army, because the poor could not really afford to provide themselves their own armor, so they really didn't have any military services to their own state. So, of course, the 9 archons and treasures were selected due to them meeting the requirements of property of less than 10 mini. So, yeah, um, in order to like be considered wealthy, property really mattered more than anything because it really showed your wealth. The concept of like money and everything is really just a modern thing, but in the ancient world, this was how things worked. And of course, lesser magistrates were chosen for those who could arm themselves. Um, the strategoi, which just means army leader, and the cavalry commanders had to show any property they had of value of at least 100 mine, and the legitimate children by wives that were citizens, and the age of their children was to be not less than 10 years of age. So yes, legitimate children were a really big thing in the ancient world, or specifically in Greece. And citizenship was like your parents had to be citizens, like going back like at least 3 generations for you to be considered a citizen yourself. It was a really complicated maneuver, but it's it's just how they made things work. So the Bulle of Dracula's time just had 100 members, I believe. You can fact check me on that. I'm not. I can't be sure because I had trouble finding it, but yeah. But anyways, they were selected by the citizen body. So the process for the selection for the Bulle was basically everybody had to be over 30 years old, and citizens had to cast lots for this, and the other offices, and nobody could hold the same office twice. That all those eligible had held it. And then after that, allotment would begin from the beginning. And there were a couple things like if a Boule member failed to do certain things like attend any seating of the ecclesia or Boule, they would be fined 3 drachma, which is just translates to silver coin. And this would be determined by whatever class they are. Like there's 4 classes. There's the Hippias and the Ziguatites and the Thetes, and then the highest being the Pentacosomendoi. And the social ladder of Athens used to consisted of 3 members, but in the time of Solon, he would add a third. And once again, the social hierarchy is really based on the amount of property you control. And yeah, the council of the Areopagus was the only one responsible for laws and supervised the magistrates to make sure they acted accordingly and legally. Um, regarding the novel treatment and how the Areopagus was involved, basically, if a man was wrong, he would present this information to the Areopagus and specify the law to support his claim. And they would pretty much really, from there, just help him. And to conclude this section, Draco was an Athenian lawgiver, and he is said to be from the 7th century BCE. He is credited to have created extreme laws or legal code, in which ended with the sentences resulting in death. This would account for any trivial or serious crimes in Athens. And something about the modern day, which I call the Lord Draco. His legal codes were so extreme that they were said to have been written in blood. In addition, this would lead to the terminology of draconian, which is really just used in the modern age to describe any law considered to be rash or harsh. And that's just something I learned really in my criminology class because I'm a major in criminology, specifically corrections. But yes, so Solon's era and his contributions. So the era of Solon was really complicated. Athens was in major political turmoil, in which the majority of the Athenians were slaves to the few, and by the few I mean the wealthy. And this led to the people opposing the leaders of the state because they did not like that. So eventually, both sides gave the power to Solon as a mediator and entrusted the state for him to find a solution to their problems. A background of Solon, probably one of my more favorite Hellenic figures. He was a middle class man in terms of wealth and position, also one of Athens' top leaders at the time. He was a poet, and in many of his public issues, he tended to write about them. An example of them being, he will say, "Grief lies deep in my heart when I see the oldest of the Ionian states being murdered." And it's really just really him just talking about his opinions on the overall politics of his world, of his time. So when Solon came to power, he freed the people of the present and of the future by making the loans for the people's freedom illegal. In addition, he passed laws that led to the cancellation of debts. As you can imagine, the wealthy were not happy about this, but at the same time, neither side was happy about this, which makes no sense. It's really frustrating. If you tend to read about the life of Solon by Plutarch, you would learn about this. It's really frustrating considering how much Solon did, and people still weren't happy. But that's people for you. Solon established the constitution and also added other laws, and the use of Draco's laws were put aside, all except the laws revolving about murder and homicide. The laws of Solon were meant to last for 100 years. They did not even last five. The arrangement of the constitution was that he divided the people into four property classes. He was the one to create the Pentacosum class, which is pretty much I consider to be wealthy, the wealthy class, and the second being the hippias, which is really just upper class rich. Like they're not they're rich, but they're not wealthy. And the Ziguatai is really just a middle class. It's really named this way because they were they were able to afford horses, and to maintain a horse, it's really expensive. And the lowest of the lowest, the Thetes. The Thetes were, as you can imagine, had little to no, and they had little to nothing. There were some rich Thetes, though. Don't get me. There's there's the upper class Thetes, and then there's the lower class Thetes. Like they're divided into two, but they're not necessarily wealthy enough to be on the same class as the Ziguatai. So the nine archons, treasurers, and everybody else were organized in these classes according to their qualification of property. The Thetes were the lowest of the class, and they were allowed to sit in the ecclesia and the dicastria, a bit of a privilege considering their class and their time period. Property qualification for the Pentacosmomen was to yearly earn 500 measures. Hippias had to earn a minimum of 300. Zuguatai needed 200. Majority of the population at Athens were Thetes, and they could not hold political office. Selection of the magistrates was based on selection from a group previously elected by each tribe. The nine archons were selected by a tribe. Preliminary selection included 10 men, and then lots were casted amongst them. Pretty simple stuff here. Most importantly, Solon introduced the Boule to contain 400 members. There were four tribes back then, and of course, 100 members from every tribe represented the Boule. And the Areopagus was given the duty of watching over the laws under Solon. They also had the power of impeachment to try anybody who went or tried to overthrow the constitution. In addition, Solon noticed the city split by faction disputes, and some citizens really didn't care and accepted whatever came. So he made a law against this and forced people to really pick a side, and if they didn't, they would lose their citizen rights. Something we should apply in the United States, because some people really just don't really participate in political matters, which they should, because you're benefiting. beneficiary of the state here, so we should. But anyways, popular features of Solon's constitution. He outlawed the borrowing of money on the security of anyone's freedom, anyone who might seek redress on behalf of those wronged. The most democratic feature of Solon's constitution was probably the right of appeal to the dikestion. This is due to people having the power to vote in courts. They control the constitution, and in this aspect, courts have to decide everything, public or private. Examples of this are really just deciding inheritances and the heirs, and a couple other things. Solon's laws were very obscure, and it's thought he could have done this to let people decide for themselves, similar to how we have to really what to call decide with some of the laws of the what, interpret the Constitution in our own meaning, because that's something that has been done in our 248 years of history. At the end, Solon was constantly questioned for his laws and refused to make changes, so he left for Egypt for trading purposes and wouldn't return for 10 years. Even though Solon had taken the approach of not favoring the rich or the poor, he still received hatred. Others hated him for the cancellation of debts, others for not redistributing the lands. So basically, redistributing the lands is basically similar to the Spartans, because that's just how the Spartan system works, and Solon just really didn't do that. Solon's departure went smoothly for 4 years until the fifth year, like I said. Three factions formed for the new constitution, having led them to poverty, cancellation of debts, and some were angered by the changes to the constitution and private affairs. These three groups were led by Megacles, the son of Alcmene, Lycurgus, and Pisistratus. Some of these groups had oligarchic aspirations, one a middle-road policy, and one was really a bit democratic in nature. And so Pisistratus, the tyrant, and his contributions. Pisistratus was one of the few individuals that usurped and made himself tyrant. But he carried himself as a man of the people, and he earned himself reverence in the war against Megara. In his rise to power, he had injured himself and manipulated people thinking his political opponents had done it, and they ended up providing him a bodyguard. Eventually, he was seized the Acropolis. After 32 years of Solon's reforms, Solon had strongly opposed Pisistratus and claimed that the idea of giving him a bodyguard was a really, really bad idea, and he had realized Pisistratus' true aim. He was aiming at a tyranny. Pisistratus ran the state more like a private citizen than an actual tyrant. Eventually, he was exiled when Lycurgus and Mycles had come together to remove him. He would return, and this would truly be the start of his tyranny. Pisistratus would give a speech, and like I am speaking in a low voice right now, he would force people to get closer and leave their weapons unguarded, because they would leave their weapons at the walls, pretty much, or had them on their person. Once he had got them to fall for it, the people's weapons were taken by his own henchmen. He would dismiss them and then take care of the state. And notable credits to Pisistratus, he provided loans to the bankrupt to help them further their work as farmers. He had a couple of reasons for doing it. He wanted to keep them scattered, not meddling in the affairs of the state, and to keep them busy at all times. He also took a 10% for every produce, something which is really funny because I'm not sure in which book. It's either the Histories of Herodotus or one of the lives of Plutarch, where he writes where Pisistratus was, where a farmer said unknowingly to Pisistratus that something that along the lines like, yeah, Pisistratus is probably gonna want this crappy um crop. But he was talking about it. It's pretty funny, but I don't know how I can't really recall it right. But anyways, the same was done for the magistrates and the dames. He wanted to keep them from neglecting work and coming into the city. He didn't really want anybody involved, pretty much. He ruled according to the laws, and his reign lasted for 32 years until his death. His sons would take over and the rule and his sons would take over and rule and conduct affairs similar to their father. Their names were Hipparchus and Hippias. Hippias was the oldest and presided over the government. Hipparchus had other affairs. He wasn't really much of a politician, to say. Eventually, the two brothers would face turmoil when one of them had a love affair and they were rejected. And of course, they would one of them would dishonored the modesty of their lover sister, and this led to the lovers, brothers coming together because they were furious at what he'd done. You could read more of this in the histories of Herodotus. I'm not going to fully cover the entire situation, but long story short, these two brothers and a couple of other conspirators came together and tried to pull off an assassination on the both brothers, but they failed. And when they thought one of their conspirators were like talking to Hippias, they had deflected their plans and they pretty much rushed to get the job done. And it was succeed in killing Hipparchus, one of the brothers. Hippias became extremely paranoid as a result, and his rule would become extremely violent. But the Spartan king Cleomenes would expel him, since the Spartans were receiving oracles to end the tyranny at Athens. And one thing to note about the Spartans is that they they were fearful of the tyranny. And anyways, last but not least, Cleisthenes and his contributions. So with the fall of the tyranny, there was a struggle between Isagoras, who supported the former tyranny, and Cleisthenes from the Agamemnoi family. Cleisthenes was unpopular in the political circles, but he 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 made up for that by winning the support of the people. He did this by promising them control of the state. Isagoras' son of Tysander's power eventually would weaken, but he would call up Cleomenes, the same person who would expel Hippias, and he would help him running Cleisthenes out of the state. He succeeded partly because the Agamemnoi family was said to be cursed, and this was how Cleomenes was persuaded. Cleisthenes ended up retiring in exile, but this would not be the end for Cleisthenes. Cleomenes eventually arrived with a couple of men to expel 700 Athenian families because they were accused of being under the curse. These families would eventually return sometime later in the first Persian invasion led by King Darius I of Persia. Cleomenes tried to get rid of the Boule and install Isagoras and 300 of his friends to control the city, but the Boule resisted and people gathered against him. Long story short, the supporters of tyranny fled to the Acropolis and were besieged for a couple of days. Cleomenes' people were let go under a truce, and Cleisthenes and the others were recalled. In ancient Greece, truces are like they're really serious. Like it's really just like swearing on oath, basically. So, anyways, back to Cleisthenes. Cleisthenes became the leader of the people, and he gave people the control to the state. In the fourth year of the overthrow of the tyranny, Cleisthenes divided the citizens into 10 tribes instead of the previously four. The main goal of this was to mix the people together so that they can share control of the state. He went on to establish a boule of 500 instead of 400. The boule would be composed now of 50 members of each tribe. He also reversed gerrymandered Attica into 30 sections, and he used the demes as a cornerstone for this. 10 sections were in the city area, 10 in the coast, and 10 inland. People of the demes would use the name of their deme instead of using a man's father's name to address themselves. And citizens were allowed to belong to their respective clan groups, fraternities, which is really just fraternities. That is where the that's the that's where our word fraternities comes from, by the way. And they held priesthood in the traditional way. Cleisthenes' reforms were great, probably that led great to the responsible for leading to the democratic rise. And one thing that should be noted about this man is that he understood that to not make too much changes. Too much change is sometimes really bad. Like it leads to people being discomforted and confused. And confusion can turn into fear. And his changes made the Constitution very democratic, partly due to the reforms of Solon, but he eventually replaced him and added the ostracism law. The ostracism law was basically where the Athenians came together to vote a person out, and he would be exiled for 10 years, I think. And this was usually to prevent popularity and to avoid the rise of another tyrant. This was the primary reason why Cleisthenes created this law, and it proved to be a pursuance of the democracy. But over time, it was used just for about anything, which was really bad, and eventually, it would lead to the fall of Athens, because they would ostracize Alcibiades, who was he was an Athenian general, and they would ostracize him at the wrong time. Like if they did not ostracize them, they probably would have not lost that bad in the Sicily expedition. But anyways, it was a good solution to use against people who had control to an army, and it would keep them in check since those with any access to military power were likely to become tyrants. But anyways, that concludes this video, and today's video is going to be uploaded at a much later time because I had trouble making this in the morning, but now we can get it out there. But like always, thank you for watching. Fact check me on anything in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.